Have you ever stared into a photograph and felt that the eyes were watching you back? In the Louisiana State Archives, there's an image from 1848 that does just that. A young woman sits at a tea service dressed in finery. Her hands folded neatly on the embroidered cloth, the silver teapots gleaming faintly in the dim light. At first glance, it is a portrait of elegance of southern refinement. But look closer, and the calm in her eyes seems almost deliberate, almost knowing. This was Celine, an enslaved woman, living in the Bogard household, captured in a moment that would soon be shattered by tragedy. Within months, the family she served would die under mysterious circumstances that terrified Baton Rouge, and her own fate would hang in the balance, hidden from official records. Who was she, and what did she see in that grand house along the Mississippi River? What decision was forming behind those distant eyes, and why would authorities go to such lengths to erase what happened? Tonight, we follow the story of a photograph, a poisoned dinner, and a woman who refused to disappear without leaving her mark. The photograph rests quietly behind glass in the Louisiana State Archives, its edges yellowed and cracked with age, as if time itself had whispered across its surface. At first glance, it seems nothing more than a formal portrait from 1848. A woman, finely dressed, sits before an ornate tea service, her expression calm, composed, serene. The silver teapots gleam faintly through the sepia tones, delicate china cups arranged on embroidered cloth. Everything in the image speaks of refinement, of southern wealth, of the elegance of a pre-Civil War household. But then, on a humid July afternoon, Dr. Helen Marrow, a historian who has spent years studying Louisiana before the war, leaned closer. Her breath caught. The woman's jewelry was exquisite, intricate earrings, multiple necklaces, symbols of status. Yet in her eyes, there was something distant, something that did not belong to such a serene scene. And then Helen saw it, barely visible against the dark fabric of the dress, a detail that would change everything. The high, ornate collar, elegant at first glance, concealed something darker. Subtle marks on her neck suggested restraint, not fashion. Helen's hands trembled as she cross-referenced the photograph with property records from Baton Rouge's Bogard plantation district. This woman was not the mistress posing for a commemorative portrait. She was an enslaved woman named Celine. And within 6 months of this photograph being taken, every member of the family she served would be dead, under mysterious circumstances, a tragedy that shocked all of Louisiana. Helen had stumbled upon one of Baton Rouge's most disturbing, carefully suppressed stories, hidden away by authorities who feared the truth about what had happened in that grand house along the Mississippi River. The formal pose, the expensive clothing, the delicate tea service, all a carefully constructed lie. This was not a portrait of prosperity or southern grace. It was a frozen moment, suspended just before everything fell apart. Helen knew she must uncover the truth behind those calm, distant eyes. What had Celine witnessed within those walls? What could have driven her to an act so desperate that it ended 5 lives? And why had this photograph survived when so many records had vanished? The Bogard estate rose along the Mississippi, just south of downtown Baton Rouge, framed by sprawling live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The main house stood as a testament to wealth built from cotton and sugarcane. White columns reached 3 stories, high wide verandas wrapped around every level, French furniture imported across the ocean filled each room. In 1848, the house belonged to the Bogard family, Antoine the patriarch, who had amassed the fortune. His wife Marguerite, famous for lavish dinner parties, and their 3 grown children, Philippe, Etienne, and Isabelle. Dozens of enslaved people labored in the fields and maintained the house. Among them was Celine, purchased at a New Orleans auction at just 14. By the age of 28, she had spent half her life in the Bogard home, rising from fieldwork to serve personally within the household. Her intelligence and poise did not go unnoticed. Margaret often boasted of Celine's refined manners and skill with French cuisine. But what the Bogards perceived as obedience was something far more calculated. Celine had secretly learned to read observing the children's lessons through doorways. She memorized the layout of every room, every routine, every vulnerability in the household. She maintained a neutral expression, spoke softly, moved gracefully, all while watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. Helen discovered records showing Celine had been separated from her mother and 2 younger siblings when she was sold. Letters from neighboring plantations hinted at the strictness of the Bogard household, though many details were carefully omitted. One letter from March 1848 noted that discipline had been applied to several enslaved people, though no specifics were given. The photograph itself was strange even for its time. Few enslaved people were ever captured in such formal portraits. And when they were, they appeared as blurred figures in the background, unnoticed, unnamed, forgotten. But here was Celine seated proudly at the center of the frame, dressed in fine clothing, surrounded by symbols of luxury. Helen began to wonder, was this truly meant to be displayed? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps a record of property or a strange attempt by the Bogards to appear benevolent before visiting businessmen who questioned the morality of slavery. Whatever the reason, this photograph had trapped a moment in time, the calm before everything changed. Helen's search led her into the dusty archives of the East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse. There, in a faded leather-bound ledger, she found a single line that froze her where she stood. 5 deaths at Bogard Estate. Suspected poisoning. Investigation sealed by order of governor. The ink that followed was thickly blotted, the words beneath intentionally erased. Why would the governor himself silence details of deaths inside a private home? Helen submitted a petition for access, pleading historical significance, and while waiting, she turned to those whose families had lived in the area for generations. Most knew nothing, only silence, as if the story had been collectively forgotten. But one elderly woman, Dorothy Hairt, remembered fragments passed down through whispers. Her great-great-grandfather, she said, had been a doctor in Baton Rouge. One cold November morning in 1848, he had been summoned to the Bogard estate. And what he found there haunted him until his final days. They were all already dying. Dorothy murmured, her voice trembling in a room crowded with antique portraits. He said it was the worst thing he'd ever seen. He tried everything, but within hours they were all gone. Then her eyes darkened. But what stayed with him was how unnatural it was. Too similar, too deliberate. He knew it wasn't an illness. When the doctor tried to report it, the authorities silenced him. They threatened to strip his license if he spoke. From a locked cabinet, Dorothy retrieved her ancestor's personal journal, never published. Inside, the entries from November 15th and 16th, 1848, chilled Helen to the bone. The doctor described each symptom in meticulous detail: severe abdominal pain, violent vomiting, convulsions. All consistent with arsenic poisoning, but it was the timing that terrified him most. All 5 family members had fallen ill at the same moment during dinner. They had all eaten the same meal. The final line in his diary read, "I believe this was deliberate murder, yet I am forbidden to pursue the matter. Authorities fear that admitting a slave could commit such an act would imply intelligence and intent they cannot allow the world to see. They call it a tragedy and move on." God forgive us all. Helen's hands shook as she cross-referenced the doctor's words with servant testimonies buried deep within courthouse records. A picture began to form the final evening at the Bogard estate. That November night, the Bogards dined alone. No guests, no outside staff, just the 5 of them. And Celine. She prepared and served the entire meal herself, a traditional Creole dinner. Gumbo rice, braised duck, and sweet potato pie. Witnesses from nearby estates remembered seeing lights glowing in the windows, hearing faint laughter carried by the warm night air. Nothing seemed amiss. Inside, Celine moved with her usual quiet grace, refilling wine glasses, clearing dishes, listening to their talk of crop yields and cotton prices. But something unseen had been added, something measured carefully, portioned precisely so that each person would receive a fatal dose. In 1848, arsenic was a common household substance used for killing rats, even mixed into certain medicines and cosmetics. A servant with access to the pantry could obtain it easily, without ever raising suspicion. And as Helen read the final lines of the report, she could almost hear the soft clink of silverware, the gentle hum of conversation, and the silence that followed. The key lay in the preparation. Celine had mixed the poison into rich, strongly flavored dishes, hiding the bitter taste beneath the layers of spices and sauces. By 10 o'clock that night, the first symptoms appeared. Marguerite complained of stomach pains. Felipe rushed to a basin, violently ill. Within the hour, all 5 family members were suffering writhing in agony. By midnight, the servants were desperate, calling for the doctor. But the Bogard estate was isolated, the roads dark, treacherous under the November moon. By the time the doctor arrived at dawn, 3 were already dead. Antoine and Etienne would follow before noon. Through it all, Celine remained inside the house attending to the dying, with the same calm, measured efficiency she had always shown. Later, several servants would testify that she seemed almost unnaturally composed, her face an unreadable mask even as chaos unfolded. One remembered her standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, watching Antoine draw his last breath, her expression still and distant in the flickering candlelight. The arrest came swiftly, though not in the way one might imagine. On the afternoon of November 17th, just 24 hours after the last death, the local sheriff and 4 armed deputies arrived. They found Celine in the kitchen, calmly cleaning pots and storing food. She showed no surprise when they placed her in irons, no fear when they announced she was charged with 5 counts of murder. Her demeanor unnerved them. She neither confessed nor denied. She simply looked at them with those same distant, unreadable eyes captured in the photograph and said nothing. Her silence was more terrifying than any protest of innocence could have been. Other enslaved people watched from windows and doorways, faces a mixture of terror and something else the deputies could not name. Perhaps respect, perhaps hope. Helen discovered that the evidence against Celine, while substantial, was circumstantial. She had sole access to the kitchen that evening. She had prepared and served the meal. A search of her small quarters revealed a hidden tin containing white powder arsenic. The trial that followed told a story of injustice. Celine was denied a proper defense. Enslaved people had no such rights in Louisiana. The proceedings lasted less than 3 hours. Witnesses were called only to establish access and opportunity. No one was allowed to question her motive. No one could testify about life on the Bogart estate. One detail remained in surviving records. When asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Celine finally spoke. Her words recorded by the clerk were later removed from the official record. She looked directly at the judge and said, "I only regret that I could not save the others." When pressed for explanation, she fell silent. Forever. Who were the others she referred to? The answer came from an unexpected source, the diary of Isabel Bogart, the youngest child who had died that night, preserved by a cousin and later passed to a private collector. Isabel's diary revealed a household far darker than official records suggested. She wrote of her father's violent temper, her mother's cruelty, her brother's casual brutality, and she wrote of Celine. In March 1848, Celine had been caught teaching other enslaved people to read. Her father had her whipped 20 lashes in front of everyone. 3 others who had learned letters were sold away as punishment, including a woman named Marie, and 2 children, Thomas and Josephine. Celine's own mother and younger siblings. Her family had been ripped from her as punishment for literacy. It all made sense now. Her cryptic statement at trial, "I only regret that I could not save the others," was not about the Bogarts. She had meant her own family, already scattered across Louisiana, beyond her reach, beyond her protection. And in that single simple sentence, the full weight of the tragedy and of Celine herself was revealed. The photograph itself would become the key to everything Helen had been trying to understand, but not in the way she first imagined. She sent high-resolution scans to a colleague, an expert in 19th century photography, asking him to examine every detail. What he found was remarkable and deeply unsettling. The photograph had been taken in August 1848, just 3 months before the poisoning. But it had not been commissioned by the Bogarts as Helen had assumed. It had been commissioned by a New Orleans businessman, Charles Dumont, a trader in enslaved people. Letters between Dumont and Antoine Bogart revealed the truth. Celine was being advertised for sale. The elegant clothing, the gleaming tea service, the sparkling jewelry, all of it staged to display her as a luxury commodity, a servant of refinement and skill to the highest bidder. Financial records showed that the Bogart plantation was struggling, and selling Celine would bring a fortune as much as $2,000, an enormous sum in 1848. But there was a darker layer. Dumont sold primarily to the Deep South Mississippi, Alabama, Texas plantations known for backbreaking labor and brutal conditions. Celine was not being sold to a fine household in Louisiana. She was being sent to the fields to hard labor that would almost certainly kill her within a few years. The photograph had been taken in mid-August. The sale was scheduled for December. She had roughly 4 months to act before being taken away forever. Helen looked at the photograph again. Celine's calm expression, it took on new meaning. It was not obedience, not resignation. It was the face of someone who had already made a choice, waiting for the right moment. Seated among symbols of wealth built on her suffering, wearing borrowed finery, posing to advertise her as property, she looked directly into the camera with eyes that concealed a plan already forming. Helen discovered why the case had been suppressed so thoroughly. The Governor Henry Johnson, who sealed the investigation, had personal and financial ties to the Bogards, owning plantations of his own. But it was more than friendship. He feared the precedent. In the 1840s, Southern slave owners still feared rebellion. The memory of Nat Turner 1831 lingered in nightmares. Any enslaved person capable of planning and executing such a calculated act of resistance, that was dangerous, inspiring, and unacceptable. Celine was convicted and sentenced to hang within a week. Yet Helen found something extraordinary in the execution records, or rather in their absence. There was no record that she had ever been hanged. After her sentencing, Celine disappeared from official records. Weeks of searching led Helen to Father Michel, a Catholic priest who counseled condemned prisoners. In a letter to his brother dated January 1849, he wrote of a woman of remarkable courage, spared the rope, but condemned to a fate perhaps worse, forgotten entirely. Following his lead, Helen discovered that several prominent families pressured the governor to avoid a public execution. They feared she would become a martyr. Instead, Celine was quietly sent to a remote labor camp in western Louisiana, her name erased from records. She would spend the rest of her life in brutal work. Her story suppressed. Her act of resistance a secret the elite hoped would die with her. The Bogard estate was sold. The grand house torn down. The family name faded. And Celine became a ghost, remembered only in whispers, her photograph hidden in archives. Helen's research, however, reached forward in time. Through genealogical research and DNA tracing, she located possible descendants of Celine. She met Lorraine Dumas, a 68-year-old librarian in New Orleans, whose grandmother had preserved stories of Celine, the woman who had struck a blow for those who could not fight back. When Lorraine saw the photograph, her eyes filled with tears. "That's her," she whispered. "I never thought I'd see her face. We always knew the story, but never had proof." My grandmother said Celine survived the work camp just barely, freed in 1871, broken in body. She never spoke of the Bogard house, but she told my great-great-grandmother to remember that she had fought back, that she had refused to be sold like cattle. Family artifacts, letters, a Bible inscribed with her name, a tin of herbs and spices preserved the memory of the kitchen where Celine had exercised the one power she had. Helen's article, published in the Journal of Southern History, caused immediate controversy. Some praised her meticulous research as evidence of resistance within slavery. Others condemned it, claiming it glorified murder. But for Lorraine and other descendants, the debate missed the point entirely. She was neither monster nor hero, Lorraine explained. She was human, pushed beyond endurance, making a choice no one should ever have to make. She knew she might die, or worse, and yet she acted anyway. Today, the photograph hangs in the Louisiana State Museum, part of an exhibit on resistance and survival under slavery. Visitors study Celine's face, trying to read the distant eyes. And the exhibit tells the full story. The Bogard cruelty, The separation of Celine's family, the plan to sell her, her decision to act Isabel's diary, and the medical records of that fateful night. Helen continues her research, uncovering stories buried in archives waiting to be told. Letters arrive from descendants of enslaved people, thanking her for giving Celine a voice. Each year, on the anniversary of the poisoning, descendants gather at the site of the Bogart estate. Modern houses now stand where white columns once rose, streets lined with trees, not plantations. They bring flowers. They speak Celine's name. They tell her story. The photograph that once commodified her now testifies to her humanity, her courage, her refusal to surrender. She could not save her mother or siblings. She could not prevent her own suffering, but she refused to go quietly into the fate others had planned. Behind every sanitized story of the past, Helen reminds us are human beings whose stories survive, waiting to be discovered, to be spoken aloud. And now, finally, we are listening.